friends, thanks for tuning in to the 120th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. So today's episode is a follow-up on a topic that has really become a theme in the 114th Congress, which is cybersecurity. In 2015, in the first year of the 114th Congress, Congressional Dish tracked 3 cybersecurity bills, 2 that passed the House of Representatives and 1, CISA, that had passed the Senate. All 3 bills were disturbing because while the details were different, all 3 bills gave immunity to all private companies for sharing information with the government, much of it automatically. And that information the government would then be allowed to use against us in court. So these 3 cybersecurity/surveillance bills, however you want to interpret them, were supposed to be carefully merged into one bill and then get a final vote in both the House and the Senate. But instead, a version of the merged bills that we had never seen before was passed as an attachment to the 2016 government funding bill, which was a 2,000-page bill that was created behind closed doors that was available to read for just a couple of days before it was voted on, and it became law right before Christmas. This so-called cybersecurity legislation was buried over 1,700 pages deep into the government funding bill, and we got it confirmed by listening to the only hearing that ever took place on that new law, that there were members of Congress that had no idea that the cybersecurity bill was hitching a ride into law before they voted. It's one of the biggest scandals of the 114th Congress, and I, for one, have no intention of letting it go. So last week, when my Comcast internet crapped out for 3 days, I watched a hearing that I had saved on my desktop that took place right when Congress came back to work after the holidays. This hearing took place in the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, and it was titled Cybersecurity: What the Federal Government Can Learn from the Private Sector. And this hearing gave me a pretty good idea of what our leaders are planning to do when it comes to cybersecurity. And so today, we'll take a look at their plan and see if it's shaping up to be a good one. And then at the end of this episode, during the producer segment of the show, or the thank you segment of the show, I don't really know what to call that segment of the show, but at the end of the episode, I'm going to explain in probably too much detail why I'm going to make another change to Congressional Dish, because unfortunately, the weekly schedule is just not sustainable right now. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm quitting or that Congressional Dish is done or I'm finished with this career. I'm in this for the long haul. But I have to scale it back a bit because, quite frankly, this production schedule is killing me. And so the decision that I've made is that for the foreseeable future, until weekly becomes realistic, if it ever becomes realistic, starting in March, Congressional Dish is going to be on a twice-a-month schedule. So you can expect new episodes of Congressional Dish on the 2nd and 4th Sundays of every month. And to the producers of this show, I'm sorry. I wish I could keep this up. But the basic reason that I can't is that I simply can't afford all the help that I need just yet to keep up this pace of production. As many of you should know, Congressional Dish is operated on a value-for-value model, meaning that you get the product up front and you are charged nothing for it. But if you get value from the show and from the information presented in it, you're expected to return that value in some kind of financial form in whatever amount you consider fair. I don't even tell you how much. Another name for this is the honor system. You've learned about it in kindergarten. In big picture, this is working, but there's still way too many people who are taking Congressional Dish for free and not compensating me for my work at all. And so until the show gets to the point where I can count on getting the money that I need to reliably afford the help that I need, I have to cut back. It's the only solution that makes sense right now. And so for the producers of this show, I'm going to give you some numbers and give you the in-depth explanation of our situation here that I think you deserve. I mean, you're paying for this show. But please know that I'm really sorry that I can't keep this up for you. And if you're someone who's disappointed by this news but has never contributed anything, well, you can do your part by paying whatever you think is fair using the options listed for you on the support page on congressionaldish.com. But until more people take this value-for-value model seriously, weekly episodes just can't continue to happen.
And that's just the way it is.
However, the episodes that you will get from here on forward, I think they're going to be pretty great. You know, we have so much to talk about. And I think that's a part of my frustration with this. You know, there have been dozens of bills passed since the holidays. You know, it's only the end of February, literally dozens of bills. And there have been favors for Wall Street. There have been lots of bills that make regulating anything harder. There's even a bill that makes watching your weight harder. It's so crazy. And honestly, based on the amount of content that Congress is giving us, I could do a daily show and still not get to it all. So we have a lot of good stories to tell. And so even though the episodes won't be as frequent, the ones you do get, I think are going to be fascinating because I'm excited to record them. So I hope that's something to make this news a little bit better to take. But yeah, I'm sorry is what it is. I hope it gets better. But enough of that for now. Let's get back to the cybersecurity hearing because that is a lot more fun. So Cybersecurity in the government, well, it needs some work, which we know for sure because the Office of Personnel Management, which is often referred to by its abbreviation, the OPM was hacked in 2014 and 2015. It was like one long hack that they didn't even know was happening for a long time. And the OPM is basically the Human Resources Department of the government. And so because the OPM is so involved in the hiring of federal employees and the employees' pensions and their insurance, all that type of administrative stuff, the OPM has a lot of information stored about those government employees, obviously. So when the OPM system got hacked, information on over 21.5 million government employees was accessed by the hackers. And we still don't know yet who those hackers are or what they're doing with the data. And so the government clearly needs to do something differently to keep its data secure, especially now that it's going to be collecting so much of it that will be legally transferred from the private sector thanks to the CISA dingleberry on the government funding law. So as you could probably guess from the title of the hearing that I'm going to talk about today, Cybersecurity, what the federal government can learn from the private sector, the congressmen and women on this particular committee invited people who currently work in the private sector to testify and give advice. And the witness list was telling. So the group of people that they invited were not from businesses that have, never been hacked and who have proven to have effective and unique insights into what good cybersecurity means. And they were also not from companies that have been hacked and have insight on what went wrong. For example, JP Chase and Company was hacked in 2014, the same time as the government. And so I'm sure that they've learned some lessons. Here's an NBC News report from November of 2015 explaining what happened in the JP Chase hack.
Federal prosecutors say some of the nation's biggest banks and financial firms have been hit by the largest computer hack of its kind. 3 men are suspected of gaining access to the personal information of tens of millions of us. But where this hack differs from most was how the suspects allegedly used that information to pocket a fortune. Our Justice correspondent Pete Williams explains.
The sheer size of the hacking attack carried out over the past 8 years is stunning. The biggest target was banking giant JP Chase. The hackers wormed their way in and stole information about 83 million of its customers. Among others hit discount stockbrokers E-Trade and Scottrade, as well as Dow Jones, publisher of the Wall Street Journal.
By any measure, the data breaches at these firms were breathtaking in scope and in size. The defendants allegedly stole personal information for over 100 million customers.
But here's the twist. The hackers were not looking to steal identities and credit card information like the hackers who went after Target did. They mainly wanted financial customer names and emails. So the hackers could send out millions of offers from phony companies they made up to buy cheap stocks, actual stocks. When the price went up, the hackers dumped the stocks. That's how they made their money, tens of millions of dollars.
All they wanted from JP Chase in this case was mostly stepping stone information, email addresses, and things that they can use to target those individuals.
How'd the hackers get in? By exploiting weaknesses found in bank computers in Egypt and elsewhere overseas. 2 of those accused, Gary Shalom and Ziv Orenstein, have been arrested in Israel. A third, a U.S. citizen, Joshua Aaron, is on the run, thought to be in Russia. Prosecutors tonight are calling this case stock fraud on cyber steroids, and they say it proves that almost any customer information can be used to make millions.
I'm sure there are so many lessons that could be learned by this experience by JP Chase. We could learn what JP Chase and Company was or was not doing over the course of those 8 years that the hack took place. The government could also learn lessons about who JP Chase was trusting to protect their networks so that maybe we could avoid trusting those same people. But those were not the type of private sector witnesses that were called to testify. Instead, Congress invited executives from cybersecurity companies, people who make their living selling cybersecurity services to private companies and to the government, were invited to testify on what the government should do. These witnesses had built-in conflicts of interest, which you'll hear soon were obvious from the start. One of the people called to testify was John Wood, who is the CEO and chairman of Telos Corporation, which is a cybersecurity company. And on John Wood's LinkedIn page, he says, quote, "Our customers include military, intelligence, and civilian agencies of the federal government and NATO allies around the world," unquote. And so John Wood, without a doubt, considers our government a very big and important customer. Another person called to testify was Larry Clinton, and he's the president and chief executive officer of the Internet Security Alliance, which is a multinational trade organization made up of cybersecurity companies. And so this guy, Larry Clinton, is like the chief lobbyist of all cybersecurity companies. This dude's a heavy hitter. And when you go on his LinkedIn page, he brags that he's been, quote, featured as a cyber expert in virtually all the major media outlets, including CBS News, Fox News, MSNBC, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, PBS NewsHour, Morning Edition, CNN Situation Room, and MTV, unquote. He's also, quote, briefed industry and governments around the world, including briefings for the NATO Center of Cyber Excellence in Estonia, the Organization of American States in Argentina, and a 2-week state-sponsored tour of India, unquote. So clearly, a big part of Larry Clinton's job is to push the cybersecurity industry's agenda all over the world, in person and in the media. Larry Clinton also wrote a paper for the Internet Security Alliance called the Cybersecurity Social Contract. And he says on his LinkedIn page that it is, quote, the first and most often cited reference in President Obama's major policy paper on cybersecurity, and was also endorsed by the House Republican Task Force report on cybersecurity, unquote. And so this paper, written by Larry Clinton, has been embraced by both the Democratic and the Republican parties, both of the corporate parties. And then on Larry Clinton's LinkedIn page, he brags that in 2013, the president issued an executive order on cybersecurity that reversed his previous pro-regulatory policy and instead adopted the principles of the Internet Security Alliance's market incentive-based social contract model, unquote. So Larry Clinton is directly attributing a major policy shift by the Obama administration to a paper that he wrote on behalf of the largest multinational cybersecurity companies in the world. And so, of course, I went down that rabbit hole. And what's crazy is that this appears to be true. So in 2009, when the Obama administration first took office, their plans for cybersecurity were very government-centered. You know, the idea was they were going to consolidate the federal government's external access points, including to the internet. So instead of every agency having a different way for people to sign on to, whatever, it was all going to happen from one portal. They were also going to have an intrusion detection system across the entire federal government, which I still think is a good idea. They were going to develop a government-wide cyber counterintelligence plan. They were going to expand cyber education and fund government research to develop new technologies to, keep up with the times. And then last, they were going to develop new acquisition policies and adopt supply chain standards. So basically, they were going to use regulation to say, if you are going to get a contract from the government, well, then you're going to have to do these certain things with your cybersecurity or else you can't get the contract. That's basically how regulations work. Well, that was 2009. In 2013, they completely switched. And so in this executive order that Larry Clinton, was talking about from 2013, Obama's new policy established a process for the Attorney General, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Director of National Intelligence to share information with the private sector. It also said that the Secretary of Homeland Security was going to coordinate the establishment of a set of incentives designed to promote the participation of the private sector in the program. So in some way, the government was going to pay the private companies to participate. This executive order also required the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, to develop standards and best practices for cybersecurity. And apparently that's already done. And so this is basically the text of CISA, except the one thing that this executive order wasn't able to do was to give immunity to the private companies for sharing information. That was going to require a change to the actual law. And that was done by sneaking that cybersecurity bill into the 2,000-page government funding law right before Christmas. And so there was, in fact, a major policy shift by the Obama